New York Harbor, September 14, 1944, 0820 hours. Luftwaffe-Helferin Margarete Hoffman stands on the deck of the transport ship watching the Manhattan skyline emerge from morning fog, and she cannot reconcile what she sees with everything the Reich told her about America's collapsing cities and primitive industrial capacity. Hoffman, a signals specialist captured when Allied forces overran her communications station in France, has spent the last 6 weeks expecting to find a nation exhausted by war, cities darkened by bombing and deprivation, a society barely functioning under the strain of global conflict. What Margarete Hoffman cannot possibly know, what no German woman raised on Nazi propaganda could imagine even in their most unsettling dreams, is that within hours, she will witness aircraft factories producing bombers at rates that exceed Germany's entire monthly output, shipyards launching vessels faster than U-boats can sink them, and American women working in positions of technical authority that Nazi ideology insists are biologically impossible for females to occupy. And within days, her understanding of military power, industrial capacity, gender roles, and the fundamental reasons Germany is losing the war will be shattered so completely by the overwhelming evidence of American might that she will question every truth the Fatherland taught her about the world, about women, and about which system truly represents the future of civilization. The German military's employment of women in auxiliary roles comes from desperate necessity rather than ideological evolution, as manpower shortages forced the Wehrmacht to assign females to positions that Nazi doctrine considers unsuitable for women. Oberhelferin Christina Weber, a senior administrative officer in the Luftwaffe Signals Corps captured alongside Hoffman, has internalized the official narrative that German women serve temporarily in support roles while men fight, an emergency measure that will end once victory allows women to return to their proper domestic sphere. She expects American women to occupy similar subordinate positions, perhaps even more restricted given American capitalism's supposed exploitation of female labor for profit rather than patriotic duty. The Nazi propaganda machine has spent years preparing German women for specific expectations about America, a nation where Jewish financiers exploit workers, where racial mixing creates social chaos, where women are treated as commodities rather than honored mothers, where material abundance masks spiritual emptiness. Luftwaffe-Helferin Anna Schneider, a radar operator captured in Italy, carries mental images shaped by German newsreels showing breadlines during the Depression, propaganda films depicting American moral decay, and ideological instruction emphasizing that democratic capitalism degrades women while National Socialism elevates them to honored status as racial mothers and support personnel for the master race. What makes September 14, 1944 different from every expectation is immediately apparent as the transport ship enters New York Harbor and the German women witness a city that shows no signs of war's privation. The skyline towers higher than any European city, buildings reaching dozens of stories into the sky with a density and scale that suggests unlimited resources rather than wartime scarcity. The harbor itself teems with activity, cargo ships being loaded and unloaded with mechanical efficiency, naval vessels moving in and out with precision that suggests command of the seas rather than desperate struggle, tugboats and ferries creating patterns of commerce that appear utterly normal rather than restricted by warfare. Margarete Hoffman, watching dockworkers, including women operating cranes and driving forklifts, handle cargo with mechanical equipment that would be rare in German ports, begins experiencing the first cognitive dissonance between expectation and reality. The efficiency seems almost threatening, suggesting industrial capacity that propaganda never acknowledged. The women operating heavy equipment particularly disturb her ideological framework. Nazi teaching insisted that women lack the physical and mental capacity for such work, that mechanical operation requires masculine spatial reasoning and physical strength that females cannot possess. Yet here are American women casually performing tasks that German doctrine declares impossible. The processing through military custody begins revealing the systematic differences between German and American approaches to female personnel. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a Women's Army Corps officer handling prisoner intake, treats the German women with professional courtesy that assumes their capability and intelligence, addressing them by rank, explaining procedures clearly, ensuring they understand their rights under Geneva Convention. The absence of condescension or special treatment based on gender creates confusion for women accustomed to German military culture where female auxiliaries occupy explicitly subordinate status to male personnel regardless of technical competence. The transport to the detention facility takes German POWs through areas of New York and New Jersey that expose them to American industrial capacity operating at scales they cannot comprehend. Oberhelferin Weber, watching through the truck window as they pass the Newark Industrial District, sees factories operating at full capacity with parking lots filled with workers' automobiles, thousands of private vehicles suggesting prosperity that contradicts every Nazi claim about American economic weakness. The factories themselves operate with lights blazing despite daylight, suggesting electrical capacity so abundant that conservation is unnecessary, a stark contrast to Germany where power rationing has become increasingly severe. The visit to a war production facility, arranged by American authorities who recognize the propaganda value of showing German prisoners the industrial might arrayed against them, provides the most devastating evidence of why Germany is losing. Luftwaffe-Helferin Schneider, touring a bomber assembly plant in New Jersey, watches B-24 Liberators moving down production lines with the efficiency of automobile manufacturing. American supervisors explain that this single factory produces 650 bombers monthly, more than Germany's entire bomber production across all manufacturers. The assembly process uses techniques that seem almost magical to someone from a nation where aircraft are still largely hand-built, standardized parts, interchangeable components, assembly line methods that transform bomber construction from artisan craft into industrial process. The women working in the factory deliver perhaps the most psychologically devastating revelation. Rosie the Riveter is not propaganda but reality, thousands of American women performing skilled technical work that Nazi ideology insists requires male capabilities. Margarete Hoffman watches a female quality control inspector reject a component for failing specifications, exercising technical authority that would be unthinkable for a German woman in similar circumstances. The inspector, a woman named Dorothy Miller, explains her role with casual confidence, treating her technical expertise as completely normal rather than a temporary wartime anomaly. Miller mentions that she plans to continue working after the war, pursuing engineering education using benefits available to war production workers, an aspiration that seems almost incomprehensible to a German woman raised to believe that female fulfillment comes through motherhood and domestic life. The encounter with American military women in leadership positions creates the most profound ideological challenge for German female POWs raised on Nazi gender doctrine. The Women's Army Corps personnel they interact with are not auxiliary support staff but military professionals who exercise authority, make decisions, and expect to be treated as equals by male personnel. Captain Helen Roberts, the senior WAC officer at the detention facility, commands respect based on competence rather than gender, addressing issues with an authority that male officers acknowledge without question. The contrast with German military culture proves stark and undeniable. In the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, female auxiliaries explicitly occupy subordinate status, addressing male personnel with deference, excluded from command roles regardless of competence, treated as temporary additions to be removed once manpower becomes available. The American system, while not offering complete equality, provides paths to authority and recognition based on capability rather than biology. Margarete Hoffman, observing Captain Roberts conduct briefings attended by male officers who take notes on her instructions, witnesses a relationship between genders that Nazi ideology insists is unnatural and destructive to social order. The conversations with American servicewomen reveal aspirations that seem almost revolutionary to German women raised in a society that defines female worth through motherhood and racial duty. Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison, a Navy Waves officer visiting the facility, discusses her plans to attend law school after the war using GI Bill benefits, educational aspirations that would be unusual for German men and almost unthinkable for German women. Morrison treats her military service as a career step rather than patriotic interruption, viewing the war as an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that will translate into civilian professional success. The assumption that women deserve educational and professional opportunities equal to men contradicts everything Nazi ideology teaches about natural gender hierarchies and proper female roles. The systematic exposure to American reality forces German female POWs to confront the magnitude of Nazi propaganda's deception. Oberhelferin Weber, possessing enough technical knowledge to verify what she observes, recognizes that the industrial capacity, military might, and social organization she witnesses are real rather than elaborate theatrical productions. The scale alone prevents deception. Factory tours can be staged, but entire cities cannot be fabricated, thousands of aircraft cannot be props, and the casual confidence of American personnel cannot be entirely performance. The letters from home that begin arriving weeks after their capture provide devastating confirmation that German reality has diverged catastrophically from the propaganda narrative. Christina Weber's sister writes carefully coded messages describing conditions in Hamburg, constant bombing, food shortages approaching starvation levels, and pervasive fear that prevents honest discussion even within families. The contrast between her sister's description of Germany and what Weber observes in America forces recognition that Nazi claims about American weakness and German strength have inverted reality, that America grows stronger while Germany collapses, that American women live better than German women, and that the ideological system she served has systematically lied about the fundamental nature of the conflict. The psychological crisis this creates proves more devastating than physical captivity. Margarete Hoffman, lying awake in the detention facility barracks, must reconcile her service to the Reich with growing recognition that she fought for a regime that lied to her about everything, about America's weakness, about democratic capitalism's failure, about women's natural limitations, about Germany's inevitable victory. The cognitive dissonance between ideology and observed reality creates intellectual crisis that some prisoners resolve by denial, others by selective reinterpretation, and still others by fundamental questioning of everything they believed. The educational programs offered to German POWs, lectures on democratic governance, American history, and constitutional principles, take on different meaning for women who have witnessed evidence that democratic systems can mobilize resources and human potential in ways totalitarian efficiency cannot match. Professor Margaret Anderson, conducting classes on American political economy, presents arguments that would have seemed like propaganda weeks earlier but now carry weight because they explain what the prisoners have witnessed. Anderson explains how democratic capitalism mobilizes innovation through competition, how constitutional protections enable social trust that totalitarian surveillance destroys, and how including women in economic production expands capacity in ways that rigid gender hierarchies prevent. The comparison between German and American approaches to women's roles becomes unavoidable. Luftwaffe-Helferin Schneider, participating in discussions with American military women, learns that the United States integrated women into military and industrial roles not from desperate necessity but from recognition that excluding half the population from contributing their full capabilities wastes resources. The American system, while imperfect, assumes women can perform technical and leadership roles that Nazi ideology reserves exclusively for men. The success of this integration, visible in factory production, military efficiency, and technological innovation, suggests that Nazi gender doctrine may be not just morally wrong but strategically counterproductive. The recognition that German women's contributions were systematically undervalued by the regime they served creates particular bitterness. Oberhelferin Weber, who managed complex logistics for Luftwaffe communications, recognizes that her capabilities were constrained by ideology that denied women could exercise command authority regardless of competence. The American women she meets, commanding units, managing technical programs, exercising authority based on ability, demonstrate that gender restrictions serve ideology rather than capability. Weber begins questioning whether Germany lost the war partly because it excluded half its population from contributing their full potential while America mobilized everyone who could contribute regardless of gender. The spring of 1945 brings news of Germany's collapse that forces even the most ideologically committed prisoners to confront reality. As American newspapers report the discovery of concentration camps, the full extent of Nazi atrocities begins emerging in ways that German propaganda cannot explain or justify. Margarete Hoffman, reading about Buchenwald and Dachau, must reconcile the regime she served with systematic murder on industrial scales. The evidence proves overwhelming: photographs, testimony from American soldiers, and eventually letters from German relatives admitting what they knew or suspected but dared not discuss. The defeat itself arrives not as shock but as confirmation of what months in American captivity made inevitable. Germany's military collapse, the regime's complete disintegration, and the occupation by Allied forces all validate what the prisoners learned through observing American industrial might, that Germany never had the capacity to win a prolonged war against an enemy who could produce aircraft, ships, and munitions at scales that made German output seem negligible. The recognition that their service and sacrifice served a doomed cause creates existential crisis that some prisoners never fully resolve. The questions about complicity and responsibility prove particularly acute for women who served the regime while believing they performed necessary support roles rather than participating in criminal enterprise. The excuse that they just followed orders or didn't know about the camps rings hollow when confronted with evidence that Nazi criminality pervaded the entire system. Oberhelferin Weber, who processed communications that might have included deportation orders or logistics for genocide, must confront her potential indirect participation in atrocities she never directly witnessed but perhaps should have suspected from the systematic dehumanization that Nazi ideology normalized. The months following Germany's surrender bring opportunities for German female POWs to explore American society beyond military installations and industrial facilities. Margarete Hoffman, granted supervised visits to New York City as part of a program introducing prisoners to civilian American life, discovers that the abundance extends far beyond war production. Department stores stock consumer goods in varieties that seem almost obscene to someone from a nation where rationing has defined daily life since 1939. Macy's department store, with its floors of clothing, household goods, and luxuries, represents consumer capitalism at scales that make the regime's promises of post-war abundance seem pathetic by comparison. The casual prosperity of ordinary Americans proves more psychologically devastating than military might because it suggests systemic superiority rather than temporary wartime advantage. Oberhelferin Weber, observing New Yorkers shopping on Fifth Avenue, notes that working-class Americans wear clothing that would mark them as middle-class in Germany, carry packages suggesting discretionary spending that would be impossible under German wartime conditions, and display a casual confidence about the future that contrasts sharply with the existential dread that pervaded German cities even before the collapse. The recognition that American workers live better than German professionals forces uncomfortable questions about which economic system actually serves ordinary people's interests. The university visits arranged for prisoners interested in educational opportunities reveal another dimension of American society that Nazi ideology never acknowledged. Columbia University, with its thousands of students including women pursuing advanced degrees in engineering, medicine, and law, demonstrates educational access that would be restricted to elite families in Germany. Professor Elizabeth Warren, conducting a seminar on constitutional law that includes several German POWs as observers, treats complex legal concepts with an assumption of female intellectual capability that contradicts everything Nazi gender doctrine teaches. The women students participating in the seminar, asking challenging questions, debating points with male classmates as equals, embody possibilities that German women were taught to believe impossible or unnatural. The individual journeys of German female POWs through their American experience reveal different patterns of adaptation and resistance to cognitive dissonance. Luftwaffe-Helferin Anna Schneider, whose radar expertise gives her technical framework for evaluating what she observes, undergoes the most dramatic transformation. She begins corresponding with Dorothy Miller, the quality control inspector she met at the bomber factory, learning about technical education pathways available to American women. Miller's matter-of-fact descriptions of attending evening engineering classes while working full-time, planning to pursue a degree that will lead to professional engineering work, represents a life trajectory that Nazi ideology insisted was biologically impossible for women to successfully pursue. Schneider's letters home to her sister in Bavaria reflect her growing recognition that Nazi gender doctrine served ideological purposes rather than reflecting real limitations. She writes carefully to avoid censorship but conveys that American women perform technical work at levels of competence indistinguishable from male performance, that educational opportunities exist without gender restrictions, and that the society functions effectively despite, or perhaps because of integrating women into economic and intellectual life rather than restricting them to domestic roles. Her sister's responses, describing the chaos of occupied Germany and the desperate need for educated workers regardless of gender, suggest that even the defeated Reich must abandon gender restrictions to survive reconstruction. Oberhelferin Christina Weber's transformation follows a different path, marked by resistance and eventual acceptance. Weber clings to Nazi ideology longer than most, interpreting everything she observes through the lens of propaganda that taught her to distrust appearances and assume American displays of strength mask underlying weakness. She argues with other prisoners that American prosperity is temporary, built on exploitation that will inevitably collapse, that women's participation in economic life represents social decay rather than progress. But the accumulation of evidence, the sustained production levels, the obvious health and contentment of American workers, the educational achievements of American women, gradually erodes her certainty. The breaking point comes when she meets German-American families whose daughters attend college, pursue careers, and still maintain family relationships, disproving the Nazi claim that educated working women inevitably neglect domestic life and racial duty. Margarete Hoffman's journey proves most complex because her technical expertise allows her to verify American claims while her ideological commitment makes acceptance painful. Hoffman, who managed communications networks for the Luftwaffe, recognizes that the American telecommunications infrastructure, the telephone networks connecting cities, the radio systems coordinating military and civilian operations, the emerging television technology she sees demonstrated, represents technical sophistication that Germany never achieved. The recognition that American technical superiority extends beyond military production to civilian infrastructure forces her to question whether Nazi claims about German scientific leadership were ever accurate or merely propaganda designed to maintain morale. The detailed comparisons German female POWs make between their experiences in the Reich and observations of American society reveal systematic differences that transcend military outcomes. The most fundamental difference emerges in how each society values and utilizes human potential. In Nazi Germany, ideology predetermined individual roles based on race, gender, and political reliability, with talent and capability secondary to ideological conformity. In America, while prejudice and discrimination certainly exist, the system provides more pathways for capability to find recognition regardless of demographic categories. The educational systems demonstrate this difference starkly. Luftwaffe-Helferin Schneider, visiting a New York public high school, discovers that working-class American teenagers receive education comparable to what German gymnasium students, a small academic elite, receive. The assumption that all children deserve comprehensive education rather than sorting students into vocational or academic tracks based on family background represents democratic egalitarianism that Nazi ideology dismissed as wasteful and unnatural. The school's female students studying advanced mathematics and science, planning college attendance as normal expectation rather than exceptional achievement, embody educational access that Germany restricts to elite families and males. The workplace observations reveal similar patterns. American factories integrate workers regardless of background, promoting based on demonstrated capability rather than ideological credentials or family connections. Oberhelferin Weber, touring an electronics manufacturing facility in New Jersey, notes that supervisors include immigrants, women, and people from backgrounds that would face systematic exclusion in German industry. The factory's efficiency, producing radar components at scales that dwarf German output, suggests that inclusive meritocracy produces better results than ideological purity, that diversity in problem-solving approaches yield superior outcomes to enforced conformity. The gender dynamics prove most shocking in their systematic nature. American women's participation in economic life is not emergency wartime measure but structural feature of the society. The female engineers, doctors, professors, and business owners that prisoners encounter built careers before the war and plan to continue after it, treating professional work as normal female aspiration rather than aberrant rejection of natural gender roles. The society functions despite this integration, indeed, appears to function better than societies that restrict women to domestic roles, suggesting that Nazi gender ideology served political purposes rather than reflecting natural law or biological necessity. The concentration camp revelations create the most profound moral crisis for German female POWs who must reconcile their service to the regime with systematic genocide. The American authorities' decision to show prisoners documentary footage from liberated camps, a controversial choice that some view as psychological cruelty, forces confrontation with Nazi criminality that cannot be dismissed or rationalized. Margarete Hoffman, watching footage from Dachau showing emaciated corpses bulldozed into mass graves, must confront that the regime she served as communications specialist facilitated this systematized murder through the same efficient organization she helped maintain. The question of complicity proves particularly acute for women who served in roles that seemed purely technical or administrative. Oberhelferin Weber, who processed logistics communications, must consider whether the supply requisitions she handled included provisions for concentration camps, whether the troop movements she coordinated transported guards to killing facilities, whether her efficient performance of duties enabled genocide even if she never directly participated in atrocities. The recognition that evil requires not just perpetrators but vast networks of enablers who just follow orders forces painful self-examination that some prisoners never complete. The comparison between Nazi and American treatment of racial and ethnic minorities provides damning context. While American racism and discrimination against Black Americans, Japanese Americans, and other minorities certainly exist, and German prisoners observe this prejudice with some relief that America's moral authority is not absolute, the scale and systematic nature differ fundamentally from Nazi racial policy. America does not operate industrial murder facilities, does not pursue racial extermination as state policy, does not treat entire populations as subhuman subjects for elimination. The imperfect democracy still operates within moral boundaries that the Nazi regime systematically violated. The psychological defense mechanisms that prisoners employ to manage cognitive dissonance vary widely. Some, like Luftwaffe-Helferin Schneider, accept responsibility and seek redemption through genuine transformation, learning democratic values, planning to work for German reconstruction along democratic lines, acknowledging complicity while committing to different future. Others, including some who maintain Nazi ideology, retreat into denial, claiming ignorance of camps despite evidence that rumors circulated widely, arguing that atrocity footage is Allied propaganda despite overwhelming evidence, or claiming that they resisted internally even while performing duties that enabled the regime's crimes. The repatriation process beginning in 1946 forces German female POWs to make practical choices about their futures that reflect their ideological transformations. The devastated Germany they will return to offers limited opportunities, particularly for women in a society reverting to traditional gender roles amid post-war chaos. Some prisoners contemplate remaining in America if opportunities arise, drawn by prospects of education and work that defeated Germany cannot provide. The immigration restrictions of the era make this difficult, but the possibility exists for those with sponsors or specialized skills. Margarete Hoffman, offered a position with an American telecommunications company seeking German-speaking technical personnel for European reconstruction projects, must decide between returning to her devastated homeland or accepting work that would keep her in America. The decision involves competing loyalties, family obligations pulling her toward Germany, professional opportunities, and the society's openness to female technical expertise pulling her toward America. Her choice to accept the American position reflects recognition that she can contribute more to Germany's recovery by helping rebuild communications infrastructure as technical professional than by returning to a society that may not utilize her capabilities. Oberhelferin Weber makes the opposite choice, determining to return to Germany despite offers of American employment. Her decision reflects commitment to help rebuild her homeland, recognition that educated Germans are desperately needed for reconstruction, and perhaps some remaining connection to German identity despite ideological transformation. Weber plans to work in education, hoping to help create a democratic Germany that incorporates what she learned about merit-based opportunity and gender equality while avoiding the ideological extremism that led to catastrophe. The educational opportunities some prisoners pursue while still in American custody reflect their transformed understanding of women's capabilities and societal roles. Several German POWs enroll in university extension courses, pursuing technical or professional education that would be difficult to obtain in occupied Germany. Luftwaffe-Helferin Schneider begins studying electrical engineering through correspondence courses, building credentials that might allow her to work as engineer rather than technician when she eventually returns home. The American university system's willingness to accept a former enemy combatant as student embodies the democratic ideal that education serves human development rather than political ideology. The influence of German female POWs American experiences extends beyond individual transformations to affect post-war German society in subtle but significant ways. The several hundred women who experienced American captivity returned to Germany carrying knowledge about alternative social organization, societies where women pursue education and careers, where merit matters more than ideology, where democratic capitalism produces prosperity rather than exploitation. In the chaos of occupied Germany, these perspectives influence Reconstruction debates about what kind of society should emerge from Nazi catastrophe. The contrast between American and Soviet treatment of German POWs proves particularly significant in shaping West German orientation toward the Western Alliance. While male German POWs in Soviet captivity face harsh conditions, forced labor, and years of detention, female POWs in American custody receive treatment that, while restrictive, maintains Geneva Convention standards and exposes them to alternative social models. The comparative experiences influenced German public opinion during the Cold War, contributing to West Germany's integration into the Western Alliance rather than maintaining neutrality or Soviet alignment. The personal networks that develop between some German female POWs and American contacts prove enduring, creating cultural bridges that facilitate German-American reconciliation. Margarete Hoffman's continued correspondence with Dorothy Miller evolves into genuine friendship that spans decades, eventually including visits and professional collaboration as both women pursue engineering careers in telecommunications. These personal connections, multiplied across hundreds of prisoners and American contacts, create human networks that support official reconciliation efforts with grassroots relationships built on shared experiences and mutual respect. The influence on gender equality in post-war Germany remains difficult to quantify but potentially significant. Women who witnessed American female professionals, experienced educational opportunities regardless of gender, and observed societies functioning effectively with women in technical and leadership roles returned to Germany with different expectations about women's potential contributions. In the context of post-war reconstruction requiring maximum utilization of all available talent, arguments for expanding women's educational and professional opportunities gained support from pragmatic necessity and examples of successful implementation in other societies. The story of German female POWs confronting American reality reveals the power of direct experience to overcome ideological indoctrination. Years of Nazi propaganda could not withstand months of observing American society firsthand, seeing industrial capacity operating at scales propaganda never acknowledged, witnessing prosperity that contradicted claims about capitalist failure, encountering women in professional roles that ideology insisted were impossible. The transformation occurred not through re-education programs or propaganda but through simple confrontation with evidence too overwhelming to deny or explain away. The gender dimension proves particularly significant because it reveals how totalitarian ideologies constrain human potential through arbitrary restrictions justified by claims about natural law or biological necessity. Nazi gender doctrine, which insisted that women were biologically incapable of technical or leadership work, collapsed when confronted with American women performing exactly those roles competently. The recognition that gender restrictions served ideological rather than biological purposes forces broader questioning of other Nazi claims about natural hierarchies and inevitable social organizations. The comparison between democratic and totalitarian systems reveals advantages of open societies that transcend military outcomes. American strength came not just from industrial capacity but from social systems that mobilized talent regardless of demographic characteristics, that educated populations broadly rather than restricting learning to elites, that encouraged innovation through competition rather than controlling it through central planning. The democratic messiness that Nazi ideology dismissed as weakness proved to be strength, diversity of approaches, freedom to question and improve, assumption that ordinary people could contribute to society rather than merely obeying directives from ideological authorities. The moral dimension cannot be ignored or separated from technical comparisons. Nazi industrial efficiency, whatever its achievements, served genocidal purposes that stain every accomplishment. American society, despite its flaws and contradictions, did not pursue systematic extermination as state policy, did not treat entire populations as subhuman, did not organize industrial murder. The imperfect democracy maintained moral boundaries that the totalitarian regime violated absolutely. For German female POWs confronting this reality, the recognition that they served evil regardless of their personal intentions or limited individual roles creates moral responsibility that some acknowledge while others spend lifetimes evading. The return to Germany forces former prisoners to reconcile their American experiences with post-war reality. The devastated cities, desperate population, and occupied status create conditions where American abundance seems almost like a dream, so removed from immediate German reality that some returnees struggle to credit their own memories. Yet the lessons learned prove relevant precisely because Germany must rebuild from catastrophe, requiring every possible talent and resource to create new society from the ruins of Nazi ambitions. The choice facing German women in the post-war years, whether to pursue education and careers or return to traditional domestic roles, reflects broader questions about what kind of society will emerge from defeat. Those who experienced American female professionals, who witnessed societies functioning with gender equality, who learned that women's capabilities extend beyond Nazi ideology's restrictions, bring perspectives that influence these debates. The practical necessity of reconstruction, requiring educated workers regardless of gender, creates opportunities for German women that pre-war society would never have provided, though implementation of genuine equality remains incomplete for decades. The legacy of German female POWs American experiences lives on in the women who chose to speak about their transformations, who used what they learned to advocate for democratic values and expanded opportunities, who contributed to creating a federal republic that, whatever its shortcomings, rejected totalitarian ideology and integrated into democratic Western alliance. Their story remains lesser known than dramatic military campaigns or political developments, yet it reveals how warfare's experiences transform individuals in ways that influence societies, how confronting alternative systems forces recognition that ideological certainties may be propaganda rather than truth, and how direct observation of different possibilities can plant seeds of transformation that bear fruit in subsequent generations.